We are live, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's session on HLF online session. But before we begin, let me apologize for missing a session last Friday. We should have had this session on 20th, but unfortunately, due to a schedule clash, we had to postpone it to this Friday. But I'm delighted that we are going to have a wonderful conversation this evening with Kumi Kapoor, who has brought out this wonderful book on the history and the current situation of the Parsis in India. And many of you must have received our email invite, which had a brief description of the book. But I'll just take a couple of minutes to introduce both our author this evening, Kumi Kapoor, as well as our moderator this evening, Shabnam Minwala. And ladies and gentlemen, the book that we are talking about, can I request Shabnam and Kumi if you have the book readily at hand? Otherwise, it's okay. Shabnam, can you?
I'll just get my book.
No, it's okay, Kumi. Don't bother. And ladies and gentlemen, the book that we are talking about is the book titled "The Tatas." Here the book. The Tatas, Freddie, Mercury, and other Bawas, an intimate history of the Parsis. This is the book, ladies and gentlemen, that we are talking about by Kumi Kapoor. Thank you, Kumi. Yeah. And very quickly, this is a book in 11 chapters. Kumi takes us through the history of the Parsis from their arrival in India to their I would say the community struggles to adjust with the modern times. And in these 11 chapters, she covers a whole range of issues connected with the Parsi community. And it begins with the very recent, or perhaps not so recent, corporate showdown between two prominent Parsis, the Tata and Tata-Mistry. And then it takes us to towards the end of the book. She, gives us a glimpse of two rebel Parsis 100 years apart. The first one was, of course, Bikaiji Kama, and the more recent one is Kobad Gandhi. Some of you may recall that we had a conversation with Kobad as part of our HLF 2021. On his autobiography. And so in these 11 chapters, Kumi Kapoor covers the history, the present status, and also looks at the future of this small but very significant community and their very, very important contribution to the modern India. And ladies and gentlemen, Kumi Kapoor, many of you would know, is a pioneering journalist. There is hardly any periodical that she has not worked with, whether it is Illustrated Weekly, the Indian Express, India Today, and so on. And again, many of you might know that her earlier book on the emergency was a very thorough book, and it had wonderful reviews and so on. Shabnam Minwala, who will be in conversation with Kumi Kapoor this evening, is again a well-known journalist, but many of us would know her more as the author of many, wonderful books for children. So she prefers her designation as an author of children's books. And of course, she's a familiar name in the newspapers, and because she contributes columns regularly to various newspapers. So without further ado, let me welcome on my own behalf and on behalf of my colleagues at HLF and on all your behalf, Kumi Kapoor and Shabnam Minwala. And thank you very much, both of you, for joining us this evening. And we look forward to this wonderful conversation between the two of you about a very interesting community, the Parsis. And just a quick reminder, Shabnam, that I will be back in the last 10 to 15 minutes with audience questions. So thank you once again, both Kumi Kapoor and Shabnam Minwala. And I hand over the session now to Shabnam. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and absolutely delighted to be here, especially with
a name like Koomi, whom I have admired from afar for many, many years. And in fact, when I was asked to do this session, my first reaction was trepidation. But I think I agreed for three reasons. One, because my father was a Parsi, and I am, I guess, an insider, outsider where the community is concerned. I am half a Parsi, of course, and somebody living in South Mumbai, there are Parsis everywhere. And in fact, in my most recent murder mystery, the chairperson of the Lily Daisy Cooperative Housing Society, a gentleman named Baman Marker, is nastily murdered very early on in the book. So my relationship with the community is varied. Secondly, my father is from Hyderabad. So when I realized this was a Hyderabad literary festival, I felt I have to be a part of it. It was too much of a coincidence, I feel. And he grew up in Sikandrabad, actually, in an area called Tarnaka, in a house named Anarkali Manzil. And in those days, it was a jungle. Now it is a marriage hall. I felt quite sad, but of course, jungles also grow up. So, yeah, that's what happened. The third reason was, of course, that I read the book, Koomi's book, and I was astounded by the level of research and the anecdotes and stories. And I am so grateful for all the tiny, tiny tales of earlier times that she has retrieved from I really don't know where, which records, which files, which people's memories, and kept them in a place where they are accessible to people like me who will never look in those dusty files and those, never meet those people who told her those stories. So thank you. Thank you, Koomi, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shabnam.
Thank you.
I would like to start, I think, with a very basic question. For you, how is your identity as a Parsi a very central fact in your life? And how did you come to this book? And when you started approaching this book, did a lot of it come as a surprise, or were you expecting what you found?
That's a lot of questions.
It is.
The first one you said, is it central to being a Parsi? Yes. Central to me? Yes. It's not central. I'm proud of being a Parsi, but I've been away from the, most of the community since I live in Delhi for long.
Yes.
But it is a part of my identity, but not, that I feel central about it or anything. What was the second question?
The second question really was, how did this book happen?
Well, the book happened, it was a series of lucky coincidences, actually, because I had gone very late on a pilgrimage to the Parsi sites of Udwada, Sanjan, Navsari, Surat. And a gentleman asked me a question that where did my family come from? I mean, I knew they were from Bombay and Pune in recent times, but where were they earlier? And I was ashamed that I really didn't know. I hadn't really thought about it much. I'd taken my identity for granted. And I became interested in researching that. And by lucky coincidence, at the same time, a publisher asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book on the Parsis. Wow. So I said I would be very interested. And I was mulling about it because I knew I did not want to write a history book, dry history book, which started with the sugar and the milk story and went on. I knew that I didn't want to do an encyclopedia of eminent names of the Parsi. I wanted to do a fun story of a people who are fun-loving, humorous, high achievers, eccentric, very sure of confident of their own righteousness, ethical, but people who have created quite an impact on, I think, India as well at the same time. And the third thing that I also knew that I wanted to do is I didn't want to write a book just for Parsis. I wanted to write a book that others would be interested as well. And I'm happy to say that the reactions I've got from the book are that Indians are generally, even in North India, where you don't hardly see many Parsis, were quite interested in the book and the Parsis as a community.
Of course. Did anything come as a surprise to you? When you started the research, were you expecting what you would find, or was it all new and fabulous, or new and...
I found, as I said, I hadn't bothered much about my roots earlier. So when I started researching, it was really a delight because I found so many things. And of course, Bombay is the central point of the Parsis. So I had to keep making trips to Bombay to meet people. But I must say, not a single Parsi refused me when I asked for an interview. Even all three of the main proponents in the Tata feud, they all met me at some point or the other. And they all opened up. We were a very open community, I would say. Yeah, I found a lot of interesting points.
That's wonderful and really lucky in a way that everybody sort of was accessible and opened up and happy
to talk. I mean, I think it helps being a Parsi in these matters, but they are an open community. And the way I do it, since I'm basically a journalist, I get more information through interviews than through books, because I don't like to include stuff which has already appeared in print. Like, for example, in my book, people often ask me, why haven't you written more about the icons, Dadabhai Naoroji, Feroz Shah Mehta? It's known about them. So what is there new to add? I mean, of course, I mentioned them, but I concentrated more on characters which will resonate and be of interest to today's readers. And that's one reason, actually, why I started my story from the Tata feud. And I wanted to bring up, in fact, that because you've written a review about my book in the Hindu, where you sort of felt that that was the least interesting point about the book. But I thought that was a very good start, because everyone relates to the Tatas. It's the largest company in India, and a business group in India. It's known for its ethical standards, and it's so diverse, and it started so many pioneering industries in the country. But so its history was interesting, but but in the process of researching, I think I came across a lot of facts about the group which have not appeared before, even though so many business journalists have been covering the Tatas for years. And it wasn't really meant as just a story of the clash or a business thing. It used the three main proponents in this feud, Mr. Ratan Tata, Mr. Tata-Mistry, and Mr. Nasli Wadia. It was an excuse to go back into the backgrounds of their families, because their families have contributed so much to the making of Bombay, to the Industrial Revolution in the Western India. So it wasn't just about them or the present day. The present day was an excuse also to examine the past.
Okay. So, yeah. So I guess I found it a little, I was more partly, at some point I felt I really wanted to know about the more rank and file Parsi, which the latter part of your book is rich in fabulous detail as well, which was...
But they're not rank and file, because if they were rank and file, why would people want to read about them?
Not exactly rank and file, but the less prominent, prominent today, I think, the less visible members. I mean, people like Bhikaji Kama and all, we travel on the roads named after them, but we don't really, I think we don't really have faces and stories about them.
And you asked me, what did I pick up along the way? I myself did not know so much about Bhikaji Kama, because of course we all know the story about her raising the national flag abroad 40 years. I mean, the model of the national flag 40 years before independence. Yes. But there was so much more to her. She was such a rebel. And we didn't really know the story that, in fact, she left Dadabhai Naoroji as secretary and became a staunch follower of Hindutva icon Savarkar. She subsidized him. She even took the blame for him, and she cut herself off from the family. They were all revelations.
Absolutely. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah. To go back to the Parsis as a community, I feel over the centuries, over the millennia, many groups of people must have shifted from one homeland and found a second homeland. Migration, some for better opportunities, some because the situation had become unfriendly in their old homes. How are the Parsis, how have they retained their identity in this unique manner? How they are Indian, but they are distinct. They have become a part of this country, but you would never confuse a Parsi with anybody else. What are the historical quirks of fate or, I don't know, elements that have kept this?
It's such a small community. I mean, at its height, I don't think it could have. Today, it is only around 50,000.
Yes.
100 years ago, it may have been 100,000.
Yes.
So it's quite remarkable that they kept their religion and they kept their identity. So one reason, of course, is they were proud of their religion, and they were obviously brought out with a deep sense of their identity. And this identity has been, they move together a lot, and there are several factors for it. One is they had tremendous sense of community. Even the rich Parsis, they went out of their way to promote their fellow brethren. And one way they did that was when Parsis were coming to Bombay from the city of Gujarat, they started the system of cluster group housing, these huge colonies, especially by the Wadias, Nasli Wadia's great-grandmother, Nesbag, the other Parsi colony. I mean, people outside Bombay won't realize that here are these houses which high ceilings, marble flooring, but they're meant actually for poor people, actually, not really so poor anymore. But what is it? By staying in a colony, they help to keep the identity of the community. There are other reasons also. Parsis are kind of a communal spirit. In my younger days, I mean, in my childhood, really, I remember we used to have, they must be still in Bombay, a system called the Gambars, where people used to have feasts. And everyone came to those feasts, rich or poor, no discrimination.
So they were just feasts pegged to a certain event, or were they pegged to festivals, or?
No. I think people used to leave in their wills a certain amount of money for having an annual Gambar. And then everyone would dress up. Sometimes it was just the men, by the way, not the women, and go for these Gambars. So
that's amazing.
And the Parsis kept their flock together. They did not let people convert in later centuries to them. And on the other hand, when somebody did convert, there was a hue and cry within the community. For example, when in the 19th century, the missionary Wilson, he took 2 of his pupils, he converted to Christianity. The Parsis were up in arms, went to court, filed a writ of habeas corpus, accused them of kidnapping.
Right.
And then in the 20th century, of course, the famous case of the what is his name? Dincha Pitit's daughter, Rati Pitit. She ran away with Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Yeah.
There was a community meeting, and they said that they would ostracize not just these rich Parsis who allowed their daughters too much freedom to mix with other communities, but they would ostracize their parents who accepted those girls who had married out.
Yes.
So I mean, they did take every step to keep their flock together.
Yeah, in fact, that record of that meeting in your book was, I think, one of my favorite parts. It was so colorful and in a way so surprising, the extreme reaction. I'm actually working on a novel which is partly set in this time and partly in 1935. So I'm reading a lot of newspapers from 1935, and there's one huge controversy involving the Parsis at that point. It's Parsi girls have started acting in Hindi cinema. And they have gone nuts. There are records of rioting and hooliganism in Karachi, Bombay. There are massive meetings, and the letters to the editor column for a week was devoted to that issue about whether it was an obscene activity or not. So it's quite...
That's true. They did that, a conservative section of the community, but you must also give the community girls credit that they went ahead and did that. They went ahead and became dancers. They went ahead and became actresses. They defied,
absolutely,
the conservative approach.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it remains a liberal community in a huge way.
It remains a very, very liberal, educated community in most matters. In religious matters is the one curiosity. They're still very conservative.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So, one aspect of your book that intrigued me really and that I had never thought about is how, a community of people who've come from outside, they've settled down, they are farmers, seem to be leading fairly rudimentary, ordinary middle class or, even lower middle class lives in little Gujarat towns and villages. How did they jump from there? How were they catapulted from there into the prominent position they hold? You've explained it a bit, sort of connected it with the British Raj and with other factors, a sense of adventurousness that may have come with their history. But could you explain that? Because that was really something that I think stayed with me from your book.
Well, one thing I would say, it wasn't catapulted overnight. The fact is that the Parsis weren't, constrained by the social taboos that Hindus or Muslims would have had to face. So they were more in a position to amalgamate and mix, and they took up trades. They were into, maritime trading. They were brokers. They were money lenders. And when all the foreign people, Western powers, whether it was the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French came, the Parsis gravitated to them and they learned their language. So they became the translator, then they became in charge of their companies at times. And they played a pivotal role. So from that, we have, if you go onwards, then there was the trade with China. Parsis were among the first to take advantage. Of course, you could call it opium trade or whatever you call it. But whatever it is, they went. And the fact that they are more adventurous than other Indians and more enterprising is that these great Parsi fortunes were made by the merchant princes. But they went to the extent of not only taking the opium, they set up their own firms over there. If you go to Calcutta, where there was also opium trade taking place, they let the British do the end part of the deal. So, and then there are some people who say that, well, it was thanks to the fact that they kowtowed to the British that the Parsis had a head start. Yes, the Parsis have always been loyal to whoever's in power. They're minority communities, so they know where to call the line. So I would say every community, they've been loyal to the British, but they got on very well with Indira Gandhi. Today, they're the one minority in Mr. Modi's regime who he approves of. Well, more than approve of, he won't use that word, but what is well, he's very kindly inclined towards them. So what were we saying that, but I would say the biggest reasons for the Parsi progress at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century is education. They were much ahead of others in setting up schools, colleges, sending their children to first Gujarati medium schools, English medium. They pushed women's education in a very big way. And I feel that more than anything else is the reason why Parsis did so well.
In fact, in your book, you've quoted some statistics which are absolutely eye-opening.
Mind-boggling. Absolutely mind-boggling.
Do you know them offhand? I'm sorry.
I have the book here, but let me look it up and see if I can find it.
I couldn't believe it. It was astounding.
Well, I'll get to that at a later point because I'll have to look at it. But yes, I mean, considering the small size of the community, the extent to which they monopolized all the college placements, the professional placements, and to such an extent that Mr. Kennedy has even mentioned that in the whole of India, they had 5%, of the professional jobs. Whereas in Bombay, I mean, it was an overwhelming majority.
Absolutely. Where do you think the sort of the image, the picture of this, the good-natured, eccentric, honest, ethical Parsi has come from? It's stereotype, whatever image that has lasted for generations, actually. And
well, actually, in the Hindi movies, the stereotype is a bit of the eccentric Parsi.
That Bawas.
Bawas, with his eccentricity. And I think that the original model is based on plays by Adi Marasban, because Parsis were always ready to laugh at themselves. So those stereotypes, which have a certain amount of truth in them about the eccentric Parsi, you know, comes from there.
Yeah, right. And what about the honesty? Because even now in Mumbai, you will find classified ads which say things like Parsi-driven car. So very clearly
that means Parsis look after their cars well. They look after their domestics well. They look after their goods and things well.
Meticulously.
Meticulously.
Yeah.
But yes, they have a reputation for ethicality also. I think it's partially because of the religion itself. So the first prayer of the Parsis, the Hashem Bowl, stresses only one thing: truth is the highest virtue, and it's happiness for anyone who follows the path of truth. So for a lie for a Parsi is a terrible thing. And if you look through, for example, the Baroda ruler Gaikwad, he used to say that the word of a Parsi is as good for me as my own currency. In Will Durant's book on the history of civilization, he also mentions that the Parsis are a race which is known for their ethicality.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think something that has come up again and again in.
There were villains in every community, so the one shouldn't pat oneself on the back too much. In fact, Mr. Fali Nariman pointed out that one of the people on the Rogues Gallery in Madame Tussauds was a Parsi doctor who, I think he murdered his wife and cut her up in the face.
I didn't know that. Oh, wow, okay.
So everyone has it.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, definitely. So tell me, when you were working on the book, what were your favorite 2 or 3 stories that popped out? The ones that made you feel your little darlings in a way, the ones that really...
Yeah, there's so many funny little anecdotes in the book that I can't say which is my favorite, but so many of the characters are made for anecdotes of their life. One example being Bapsi Sabawala. She was the daughter of the Baronet Kawasji Jangri, and totally eccentric to the core. In my childhood, when I was in Mathiran on a holiday, we all knew the story of how she used to send her dolls for play dates and got furious if the people didn't look after the dolls properly. But I had a lot of anecdotes about Bapsi Sabawala earlier, but when I talked to one of her relations, he gave me a lovely one about how she was once staying for several months in Montreux, and the baronet was supposed to send money for his daughter and her 2 little sons. But the money didn't turn up, and the hotel owner was getting a little anxious. So she said, I'm going back to India, but I'll leave my sons as surety. Little boys.
It was amazing. Really an amazing anecdote. But, and in fact, Jerry Pinto has done a book for Pratham on Kemulrab Gallery. So he begins with her and he talks about this ball she once held for animals at the Taj, in the Taj ballroom. And apparently, I think a horse was taken up the Taj staircase by her. So she...
Yes. But I don't think that was a ball for animals. I think she wanted to embarrass her husband, who was the manager of the Taj Mahal Hotel. And she was seeking a divorce from him. And that is why she took a horse up the stairs.
Oh dear. So, okay, this is our version. The Pratham version is for animals. So we don't know. But apparently she adored animals.
Yes. She was, and many other Parsi women were among the first animal rights activists.
Yeah.
Women's rights and animals' rights both.
Yeah. And in fact, she set up swabbles.
She set up swabble saws for beating, and she was very concerned about things like wife beating. And her horses, her relative Adi Jahangir, I remember telling me that anytime she saw Tongawala, beating his horse, she would grab the horse, the whip from his hand and beat up the man. So she was a terror in that part of Malabar Hill when they were trying to take their horse carriages up the hill.
So do tell us a couple of more anecdotes or stories about, others that pop out in your mind that you...
There's so many. What would you like? Well, I was very intrigued by another one, which I heard before I wrote the book. then I checked because Mr. Palkhiwala was alive in those days, and he's such a humble man. He said, yeah, it is true. Soli Soraji had told me the story that, in fact, he had no great ambition in life. He was very good at English, as were most of these great Parsi lawyers. And he thought he was bound to get a lecturership in the college. I'm not sure which college it was. And he was certain about that. So, because he comes first class, gold medalist, everything. But the position had already gone to a Parsi lady who was already in the college. So he was quite shocked. He didn't know what to do. He was poor, not from a wealthy family. And the only course open to him at that time was law. So he joined the legal profession. And actually, he was so grateful to the lady who took the job he had wanted to take that he used to take her out every year for a fancy meal as thank you.
Amazing. Lovely.
But there's another story, if you want, which again I learned when in my childhood, that Sapurji Palanji, one of the big builders of Bombay, whose grandson is Cyrus Mistry, delegation of Parsi ladies had gone to see him, expecting an ad for their Time and Talents charitable organization. And it was like customary, no Parsi industrialists turned them down, they were expecting. So Mr. Shapurji didn't turn them down, but he started complaining about how poor he was and how he had problems even, sometimes paying for his tea. And the lady in charge, she was the daughter, after all, Gul Shavaksha, of a very famous jurist.
Yes.
She's Justice Mullah. She took out her purse and put a rupee note on the table and said, "Come, ladies, let us go. And that's for your tea."
Superb. Absolutely brilliant.
Yes, but the lady who arranged the meeting was not happy. Oh. She said, "It put me in a very embarrassing position."
Oh. And who was she? Do you know?
I don't like to say.
Okay, fair enough. And how did the gentleman react when the 1 rupee coin?
I think he carried on. He didn't mind. I don't know, but if you read his life story, you'll see. Yeah. It wasn't that he wasn't generous, but he liked to do things his way and his generosity.
Yeah. I even love the stories of the Godrej safe and the Godrej soap, and how Godrej's was closely linked with the Indian sort of Swadeshi movement.
Yes, very much so.
No clue about. So, like I said, I'm reading all these papers from the 1930s, and there is the Congress is celebrating its Golden Jubilee, and there's a huge Swadeshi sort of exhibition near Tejpal at that time. And the Godrejes seem prominent, really prominent. They're doing on a regular basis. And so, and I kept thinking of your book and why don't you tell the audience a little about that wonderful, the business of how he designed that safe and put out a notice challenging.
Yeah, he not only, he put out an ad which was very creative, challenging anyone to break his safe, and nobody could. He offered some huge amount if you can break the safe.
I'm very intrigued.
But his biggest actually, he was asked, I think by Tilak, why don't you make a vegetable soap? And he invented it.
Yes.
Very versatile inventor. Many ideas and very crotchety. And he again was very eccentric. I mean, he was so rich, but he used to walk to work on his office very often.
Yes. And I guess he was central also to one of sort of Bombay's biggest murder mysteries or crimes or mysteries, right? Wasn't he the gentleman whose wife?
Yes, it was not a murder mystery, but it was a very tragic event that his young wife had gone up Rajabai Clock Tower, and apparently there was somebody who followed the two women, and to save themselves from any sort of molestation, they jumped to their death from the tower. And the Parsis were very upset and took it up and wanted the person who they believed was the attacker arrested. But I think they said he was an influential person. But he himself did not get into it. He was just very upset and, he became more of a recluse than ever.
Yeah, so the horrendous way, but I mean, from there to emerge as, I guess, one of our great inventors or innovators.
He started as a lawyer, actually, but
Oh, I didn't know that.
in Zanzibar. But the point was, he said he couldn't lie. As a lawyer, you were expected to lie. So he gave up the profession.
Yeah. So in fact, I've seen a full page ad in one of those 1935 newspapers proudly saying Germany is now exporting ours. We are exporting our soaps to Germany now. And then a lot of little quotes from German skin doctors and all talking about how good the soap is. And it must have been such a coup in those days to, get there.
The parties at the start of were the big, produce most of the things. I mean, like, for example, not many people know that when you think of Anand Dairy, you think of Amul. But long before that, there were Parsi brothers Kotaris who had been developed in Amul Dairy to provide during the British time.
Okay.
To provide powdered milk during the war.
Wow. Who are the characters? Were there any characters that you admired extraordinarily, past or present?
I have a soft corner for a lot of them. It's difficult to single out one in particular.
Single out three, triple out three.
Well, I always had a soft corner for Mr. Palkhiwala because I think that the mark that he has left in the whole, of safeguarding our constitutional rights, nobody has done as much. And he was such a humble, simple person at that. And it was not only in law that he was, such an icon, but even in at a time when it was the licensed Raj, he was the one man who went around army, who went after every budget all over the country, and he got these huge crowds to point out what was wrong with our budgets. So he was the first one for the liberalization. Simple, good man.
And who else? Anybody else?
Well, as we mentioned Madam Kama, I admire her greatly. I think she was remarkable. There's so many, I don't know how you can. I mean, Homi Baba, he was a Renaissance man. He was gifted in so many different directions. Came back to India and he started the scientific, our whole scientific foundations in independent India, thanks to him. And it's because of him, because Nehru had such a great respect for him, that we started very early in the getting into nuclear energy, which was the way to self-reliance eventually, which Bhabha realized. And then, of course, there's Sam Manekshaw. And what he is, I don't think he's just there because of what he, the fact that he led the Indian army during its greatest victory. I think what was just as important is that Sam Manekshaw upheld the dignity of the army. And that's why he got into trouble with a series of politicians. And he himself, he was a great joker, if you want jokes. He said that there's a very thin line between becoming a field marshal and being sacked from the army, because he had got into such trouble with Krishna Menon. But then the Chinese war came.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, there's a wonderful anecdote about Sam Manekshaw in your book about how he almost died, or I think.
That's. There may have been a little exaggeration, but yes, according to the Gorkha, he was. He got the victory medal.
So actually, my brother is at TIFR. So every time we visit, we think of Homi Bhabha because he was such a towering figure who set up institutions that are truly world class at a time.
Yeah, at a time when we had nothing. And what is more, he persuaded a lot of our great Indian scientists to return to India.
Absolutely.
And he set up an institution which, he did things because most government institutions are, what do you call it? You know what they're like. But Homi Bhabha took interest in every aspect, whether it was the beauty of the building, the paintings he chose, which Nehru gave him the luxury of doing. But those paintings are worth an absolute fortune today. So it was a very good investment. He had an eye. And then again, saving trees.
And
he was a very talented person, a pianist, painter.
In every
died much too young.
Yeah, and almost sounds like half the community was in love with him. The The girls.
Well, the community had many people whom they seemed young, handsome men.
Yeah, well, that's true actually. What do you feel, this whole episode of the Tatas and the Mysteries has done to the image of the community? And is it something you regret, or do you just feel it's inevitable?
No, I don't have any right to regret or not regret it. It was, of course, we all felt unfortunate that it had to come to this level, because I don't think Mr. Cyrus Mystery was doing anything particularly wrong at all for this hastily him being removed the way he was. It was a shame.
But you because you have given it quite a bit of importance in your book. What do you feel? Do you feel it symbolizes?
Why I gave it because I thought the average reader, not just somebody interested in the Parsis, will be interested to know about this great Parsi house and its future. And usually people do not write about the Tatas except what is fed to them, because they are a little in awe of such a great institution.
Yes,
They've given all their money to charity. So I felt it was a good way to start to also bring in other readers apart from just Parsis or people interested in Parsis. I also wanted to include the people who are interested in Indian business, because the Parsis are an entrepreneurial community who played a great pioneering role in that respect. And I do think that I have put across in the early chapters some of the insights into the company, which have not been brought out by all these commercial economic journals over the years.
We keep hearing about what is happening to the community, and the favorite label now seems to be dying community. And I live right next door to Khushrobagh, and they have.
By the way, I'm puzzled about one thing.
Yes.
Parsis, except you said your father was a Parsi.
Yes.
So that automatically makes you a Parsi if you do your Navjot. Why did you decide not to, your parents decide not to have your Navjot?
I think it just was a decision they made. And both my brother and I think we turned we were clearly anti-religion from a very young age. So I think we were given up as lost causes by both my Muslim mother and my Parsi father. They just, let us be. And
Gotcha.
I think as my brother, my husband, my sister-in-law, we're all very agnostic. And I would say some are even very violently atheistic, but not me. I'm not.
Yeah, but I just want to point out one thing, because this is a common misunderstanding.
Of course.
You are still half a Parsi.
Yes.
Because a Parsi is not a religion. It is it's a community which came, they are the descendants of people who came to India around the 8th century.
No,
thereabout. So, I mean, Zoroastrian is a religion, so you're not a Zoroastrian, but you are certainly half a Parsi.
Of course I am. And my daughters are now, they very proudly say, quarter Parsi, quarter Muslim, half Hindu. So it's very meticulously laid out for all strangers. So.
Well, I have a very mixed family as well, really mixed.
Yeah. And in a way,
that is what happens with time, which I pointed out in the book, in fact. My grandfather would have been absolutely heartbroken if he had known where his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, that they would marry outside the community. But that is the tragedy. The community is getting smaller and smaller, and the community does not admit, children of women who marry out.
Women, yes. So, yeah, it's a pity in a way. But, yeah. So, so I live right next to Khushrobagh, and they put up this really sad blackboard where they mention the names of the people who've passed on. And
oh dear.
Yeah, it's very depressing to walk past every time. And you really get the sense of sometimes a feeling of fading. Also, you see so many of the residents are older people, and many seem not married. What do you think this has done to the community, this, sunset feeling? Or do you think it's something people think about, care about?
Yes, I think they do feel it. But we are 50,000. We are declining at the rate of about 10% to 12% every decade. So in another at the end of the century, we will be a tribe at the most. But one thing that I was very happy to find in my what do you call it, while I was doing my research, and at an earlier literary festival, the tone of the participants who were all Parsis was that we are going to the dogs now. I don't feel that at all. Whatever Parsis are still left are really achieving a lot even now. I mean, when you think of their numbers, there's Mr. Poonawalla, who's founded the largest vaccine manufacturing company in the world in the last 20, 30 years. I mean, just a month ago, Justice Rohinton Nariman retired. I saw reams of him in all the media, which I never see for other retiring Supreme Court judges, because he has made such a contribution in establishing the laws through his judgments. I was so happy to learn. I don't know much about sports, but I understand that after 40 years, a Parsi boy from Surat has been included in the, what do you call it, in the Indian Test team to England. Okay. He's a reserve, but that too is still a very big thing. I mean, there was a time when there were Parsis, after all, founded cricket in India. You know that from reading the book.
Okay.
Oh,
I mean,
how did you miss that?
I don't know, didn't register, perhaps. Yeah.
No, the first cricket team in India was by the Parsis. When the British came to India to play in the cricket, the first team they played was Parsis, and they won in one of those years. And this is all the time of the first war of independence. This was going on. Okay. So, and there was a time in the 60s. Again, I'm not no great sports person, but there were 4 Parsis in the Indian cricket team.
Yes, of course. So I remember.
So we were there, but I'm digressing from what I wanted to say is that these people who say that we've lost our will, we've lost our spirit, I don't agree with that at all. There's next to your Kushubag, there's an amazing success story of very recent times. There's this Parsi girl who's started a chain of
Theobroma. Kindness. Yes, she's a friend of mine.
In 15 years, she's got 50 outlets.
It's amazing.
Where is the spirit dying out? Though I did find many people saying, oh, we've lost our spirit. We're now sitting back and patting ourselves on our past glory. But I think there's still a good spirit there. I was very heartened. Maybe because I'm not from Bombay. I found Bombay people are more cynical.
And more downhearted for some reason. Okay.
Yes. About
no. Yeah. Okay, now this is a question that I really want to know. Where did you get your research from? Where did you do everything as personal interviews? Did you get this wealth of stories just by...
No. I had to read so many books. I picked up all the books I can, went through all of them, everyone on the Parsi. And of course, but I'm a journalist, so I don't really like taking what other people have, which is why I said I tried to avoid people who have been overwritten about. And the very common question, I guess, you haven't written hardly anything on Dadabhai Naoroji. What am I going to write that's new about him? So in any case, I was interested in the present.
Yeah.
So I feel I was lucky that I managed to interview, and it's a sad thing to say, but at least 4 or 5 of the people whom I've interviewed have since passed away. So what I'm saying is it's a good thing that I did it when I did.
Yes.
That memories were still there of the past, because less and less do we know. I myself knew nothing. I mean, what I remembered in childhood, but then I moved away. Huh?
Yeah, of course. No, I totally agree with you, because like I said, I'm not fully inside, but I'm not fully outside either.
Yeah. And you're like me. You're like...
Yeah. And I'm very interested in local history, but there was so much I didn't know, and for which I'm so grateful to you.
Glad.
Yeah. Professor Vijay, are there questions from the audience? Because
Yes, there are in fact many comments and questions, but Kumi, before I take up the audience questions, I have 1 or 2 of my own. Let me misuse my position here as the anchor and ask you those questions. One thing that I really missed in your book is the contribution of Parsi writers.
There's only passing reference to Rohinton Mistry, but as I told Shabnam, this is not a book which can include everything or is meant to be an encyclopedia. So it is the Parsi artists have been ignored largely. I've taken one or two if they fit into a story, because it's really a story. It's a fun story. I didn't want to make that now there's this writer, A, B, C, D. So that is why. More what I really regret, and which I've included, since I'm happy to say there has been a reprint called for, and which I've included, which was there in my original book, and which somehow in the corona and my going to Goa and all got left out, is Adi Marisban, because I think his role, Parsi theatre, was very, very important to the Hindi cinema. And also he himself was an institution among the Parsis, and that has been included. But there has to be, you pick some, you keep some away.
Yeah. In fact, I was going to ask you about the Pune. You mentioned the first cricket team being a Parsi cricket team, of course. And of course, we all know the theatre was pioneered by the Parsi theatre. And that's
and so was the Western, so was the vernacular media, newspaper, journalism.
Absolutely, yeah.
In Western India.
Yeah, other field that there was a passing reference in your book, but the other is the politics, Parsis and politics. We know usually Parsis stayed away from politics, but there are...
After independence, they stayed away. Otherwise, they were...
yes, but even after the independence, for instance, I think...
I have mentioned all the Parsis who went to parliament. But they haven't been, and then I go on to point out. In fact, I've written about them from Masani to Pilu Modi to Homidaji, and I've given a long write-up to Firoz Gandhi, who's of special interest. And I point out, not just because he's married to the most prominent political family in India and gave his surname, even if misspelled, to them, but for the fact that he, at a time when the Congress was so overwhelmingly in numbers in parliament, he acted as the role of the opposition.
Correct.
And he did two exposés. So no, I wouldn't say that I ignored the Parsis in politics in post-independent India. I also mentioned both the Parsis who've been in the Rajya Sabha as nominated members, whether it's Anu Aga or Fali Nariman. I've done it in some detail. But I agree, as far as the arts goes, I haven't done it, because there had to be a point where you stop, it's a story.
Yeah. Because I think one of the most...
If it weaves in, it weaves in. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
Because I think one of the most controversial political decision was probably during the, Swatantra Party, Rajgopalachari's Swatantra Party being supported by the Tatas, because they were a little upset that Nehru was moving far towards the Birlas.
Let me put that in perspective. If you read my book also, you'll find it. JRD was against generally politicians. He was very much against business people interacting with politicians and taking favors from politicians. He did not favor the Swatantra Party over the Congress. Rajagopalachari wrote a letter to him, said, and I know the Tatas contribute to the Congress party. I feel it's only fair that we as an opposition should also be given some money. So he wrote back a letter to Nehru, which no other businessman would have ever dared to do. This was J.R.D. Tata. And he said that I am also decided, he has a point, I will also give some funding to the Swatantra Party, because I don't think any country can survive in this country unless there's also an opposition. But which businessman will go and tell the ruling party of this? And he never supported one over the other. Actually, he was annoyed with anyone getting into politics, though he made one black mark on his name is I think it was the New York Times, after the emergency, he actually indicated that he supported the emergency.
Okay, now I'll take up questions from the audience. The first question that I see is by Satya Prasad. He was saying that I know that there is a statue of Khada Parsi at Baikula. Is there a statue of JRD or even a road named after him? If so, where?
my knowledge of Bombay is not that good, so I cannot say, but I cannot believe that the Tatas and the Parsis would allow this to happen. And if they have, it's a serious, serious lacuna and should certainly be rectified.
You mean they are against the...
No, they are not against. So I cannot understand. I'm sure there must be. But if what the questioner says is correct, it's a serious lacuna. The same thing has happened to, by the way, to Bikaiji Kama. There is...
but
in Kama Road.
Yes, by the general public, but not by the Parsis.
Okay.
Anything.
Yeah. And
the government of that. I'm sure there must be something after J.R.D. Tata. I can't believe. In fact, they wanted to name an airport after him. Recently, there was a thing. Though I think we don't have the numbers to get our way in this matter. Though I think it would be only fair that the man who really founded the aviation industry in India, an airport should be named after him. I think that would be very, very
befitting.
And befitting.
Yes.
Yeah, and the second question is from Hans Langarke, and she's asking, is anything known about the relationship between the Parsi and the Jewish minorities in Bombay, particularly during the 19th century?
Oh, well, Sassoon, who was the leading Jew of his time, was also in the cotton mill business, which were the leading Parsi industrialists were also there. So there was a lot of interaction between them. And similarly in both Bombay and Pune. And if you go back to historical times, the Jews have mentions Zoroastrian rulers with great awe and respect, especially Cyrus the Great in the Old Testament, because he freed the Jews in Babylon, from confinement. And he built their temples also. In fact, they call him Cyrus, anointed of the Lord.
Okay. Amita Desai, my colleague from HLF, is asking you to explain the subtitle of your book, where you say an intimate history of the Parsis. So what exactly did you have in mind?
Well, the question was really, what was the book going to be named? There was quite a bit of argument about that. My editor wanted the subtitle to be the name. I had some journalist friends with me when I was staying in Goa, and they said, no, that's not the right title to catch eyeballs. And I agreed. Once you write history, even if you say intimate, it's not going to. And actually, the book is about people. And so finally, we agreed on this title, which is which is an accurate title, because, of course, it's chosen a few of the many, many names of people I've written about. But
I think it also gives a range of the people that you have covered, from the businessmen Tatas to...
Well, the cover does give the range.
Yes.
Because I selected those people, with some thought.
Correct.
Yeah. And the publisher gave me the freedom to choose. I said, will 5 be too many? But they said, no, they do it. I think they've done a pretty artistic job of it.
Yes. And one more question is, Aparna Bagwe is asking, Tata Memorial Center, the Cancer Hospital, the Research Institute, I have been a scientist there, and I'm so proud of my alma mater. And so many philanthropists across all businesses and industries. Kudos to the Parsis. I think their contribution to the, you mentioned education, the field of education, but also I think charity in terms of...
all types of charities. And to be fair, mostly for all Indians, not only for Parsis alone. And if you go back to, of course, the Tatas, philanthropy is so well known. Some people say it's the biggest philanthropic outfit in the world. If not, it's the biggest. It's between third or the first. But apart from the Tatas, every Parsi had a tradition of philanthropy. Jamsetji Jiji Boy, for example, did so much for his city of Bombay. His wife funded the Mahim Causeway so that it would help benefit everyone. When the British put tax on grazing cattle, He brought up the land, which is now Chandni Road.
Yeah. And the interesting, anecdote you mentioned very briefly, but DM is asking, please share any interesting anecdote about Field Marshal Manekshaw.
Oh, there's so many interesting anecdotes about Field Marshal Manekshaw. If you read the book, you'll get them more. But let me think of one which serves its papa thing. Well, once he was on the board. I've told the one about, when he said there's a very thin line between being fired from the army and becoming a field marshal. Another interesting anecdote about him was when Krishna Menon asked him, at that time he must have been a lieutenant general or major general, I'm not sure which. He asked him about his boss Timaya, and he said, why should I tell you about my boss? That's not the tradition of the army. Next, you'll have my Jawans asking my Jawans what they think of me. He's a very outspoken and frank man. Said what he felt.
Yeah, Kumi, you have explained it in the book, but that's something that I really liked, and I'm sure our general audience would also like to know the story behind the surnames of the Parsis.
Well, since we didn't have a caste system, thank God for that, we took the names usually of the professions we came from, and of course, the most famous surname of the Parsis, which they joke about, because they are very specific surname. You don't just say, for example, that you're selling alcohol. You say you're a gin wala, which means you're actually selling only gin. Or you're a toddy wala. You're selling only illicitly, toddy from the tree.
Yes.
And of course, the most specific, which has now been made into a famous restaurant chain, the surname is Soda Water Bottle Opener Wala. True surname, not a joke.
In fact, we do have one outlet in Hyderabad too.
Oh.
Yes, of the same thing.
But it's a bit of mixture of Parsi and Irani and a little bit of the local taste as well.
One interesting story, one interesting comment about food of the Parsis. So anything that you want to mention about the food of the Parsis and their...
I would say that it is one of the most early fusion foods, because the Parsis, incorporated what they had brought from the traditions they had brought from Persia, like fruits and nuts and a little sweetness in their food. And with that, they incorporated the spices of Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, and they developed their cuisine so well that they included British cuisine, the cutlets and stuff like that, French cuisine, Portuguese, the bindalu. So I would say it's one of the earliest fusion foods.
So
long before the term became fashionable.
I know. Fusion becomes... I think we do have a few comments. Some of them are really, asking about your book, and they are all looking forward to reading it.
That's great.
Yes, and many of them have commented about the contribution, particularly of the Tatas and other Parsis to the community as a whole, to the entire Indian community.
Yes, I'm glad you said Indian community, because
absolutely.
It's not. They're not communal charities. They're for everyone. Most of them.
And one question here, I just saw it here, is Parsis are known for their business acumen. Are they really socialized with Indian society?
I didn't follow what the second part is. They have entrepreneurship more than, I would say, business acumen. And, in many cases, the Tatas being the outstanding example, they were not so bothered about the bottom line. Like, for example, Jamshedji Tata's son, Dorabji, was willing to sacrifice everything to keep because he believed what his father had started, which was the steel industry in India. But it came at a terrible price. But he was willing to sell his wife's jewelry, all that, his holdings, land holdings and other things, so that he could bail out this Tata Steel company, which was bankrupt. But no, he didn't own it actually. And they never bothered, Jamsetji himself never bothered about the bottom line. That is why the Tatas have never been among the richest Indians in India. They may control the largest corporate group in the country, but the money has not gone to them.
And I think either in the book or I read somewhere that the Parsis are also willing to wait rather than bribe their way through to set up industries. There was this.
Well, the classic example is J.R.D. Tata,
Correct,
who did not want to get his hands dirtied in the license Raj by paying off politicians. So there was a period when the Birlas overtook the Tatas as the leading business house in the country. But he waited his time and,
Yes. Thank you so much, Kumi.
Thank you so much for calling me, Professor Vijay.
And Shabnam, thank you very much for this conversation. And ladies and gentlemen, with this, we come to the end of this evening's session. So on my own behalf and on behalf of my colleagues at HLF and on all your behalf, I thank Kumi Kapoor and Shabnam Minwala for this evening's session. And we just wanted to remind you that we will be back next Friday at 7 p.m. with a fascinating session on food. We just talked about food, Parsi food. And in the next session, next Friday, we are going to speak about Jewish food and Muslim cuisine in India. So ladies and gentlemen, please look forward to our next session next Friday, same time, 7 p.m. And we'll be back with another session of HLF Online. Thank you once again, Kumi and Shabnam, and a great conversation and wonderful anecdotes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Vijay.
Thank you.
Should we